It's Thomas LaVecchia here with, not Tom or Thomas, whatever you prefer to pronounce you. Tom LaVecchia here with the latest edition of the Armchair NBA. We go live to tape, so I'm going to keep that little edit in. We have a very special guest today, and this is a first for me. I have spoken to ATF agents before, but I don't think it's my first interview. I've interviewed DEA, I've interviewed FBI. I'm working on getting somebody who was CIA.
Nice.
I did intelligence ops, so I covered the whole gamut, but except for CIA and well, on the book CIA, and now ATF. So we have Ignacio Esteban. Welcome to the Armchair MBA. How you doing today, buddy?
Good, man. Tom, great to be on your show. I appreciate having me on it. It should be a good one.
It's going to be a good one. So everybody who watches the show, for the most part, knows that I historically cover traditional Italian organized crime. And for those that watch shows, you often hear like the FBI standpoint on organized crime, right? Just philosophically or even individually, they have a certain view towards organized crime, Italian organized crime, right? Mm-hmm. But when you talk to DEA agents and other agencies, they kind of take a different view and a different optic towards organized crime. Let me give you an example. The DEA just consider them drug dealers. If they're working on a drug case and it's a big, OC sweep, they don't care about honor, none of this Godfather crap. Their organization, they just want to bust them. Give me the ATF's view and Ignacio Esteban's view of organized crime, Italian organized crime in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, especially, and I've also written a lot. I mean, I'm retired law enforcement, so your audience knows, 26 years federal law enforcement. Awesome. I was 21 years with ATF, and those who don't know what ATF is, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives in the Department of Justice. And before that, I was with U.S. Customs in Miami at the airport. Yeah, I was there for about 5 years in the 90s. So I was there during the heyday where the cartels, Colombian cartels, were still pumping a lot of drugs. The Medellin, Cali cartels still pumping a lot of drugs through the airport, right? They was before the Mexican cartels took over, and it would go through the land border. So I would see a lot of huge seizures, be part of it. I would join the contraband enforcement team, which was the elite team at the time in the 90s, seize some of the biggest drug seizures in the country. So it wasn't uncommon for me to be part of seizures where we had 900 pounds of cocaine that coming in from Guayaquil, Ecuador, transshipment country, coming directly to MIA, the airport, quick way to get it in, and it'll be in the huge grouper and fish. You have a block of kilo next to a block of ice, and that stuff was going to get ripped off. So yeah, I've seen some big time seizures, and that was part of the Colombians working with different organizations and how it grew there. And of course, they would collapse, and then I would end up with ATF and gun cases, firearms trafficking, and ATF works. A lot of people know what I did, and you can see the poster behind me. Yeah. I did a book on my autobiography called ATF Undercover, where I dealt a lot with repeat violent offenders, gang members. ATF does a lot of nasty gang cases, really violent guys. Probably the Cosa Nostra was violent in its own right, but nothing like the cartels and nothing like the street gangs that we see. And I talk a lot about that. I did international firearms trafficking, domestic firearm trafficking cases. I did armed drug dealer cases, murder for hire investigations, armed home invader investigations. So a gamut of different violent people, a lot different. Sometimes the FBI does organized crime, white collar crimes, but the ATF agent, we were right there with our counterparts, state and locals, working hand in hand with these violent offenders, these violent cases. That's what ATF does. There's a misconception that ATF's there take people's guns away, but most ATF agents I work with are very pro Second Amendment. Very pro Second Amendment. We want people to defend themselves, to protect themselves, but we're not going to have violent offenders, criminals, and thugs victimize people. And those are the kind of cases I did, and I was a part of them, and proud to be it. So back to your question. My conclusion, because I'm also an author, I retired about a year and a half ago. I became, thank you, sir. I became a good writer. I became a prolific writer, and have written almost 66 books published on Amazon. 66. A lot of it has to do nonfiction, deal with organized crime. I've written about the Cosa Nostra. I've written about the one percenters, the biker groups, the cartel groups, law enforcement, my personal life in there, and the gamut of other things between firearms trafficking, current events, subjects, and also do some political books also, because originally that was my background. I had a background in political science and history, and I was studying a master's degree in international relations at FIU, which is in Miami, Florida National University. And I was going to go to law school up in Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. But then I decided law school is expensive in the 90s. You know how law school is. You're probably looking at between $25,000, $30,000. And I started putting in for different positions in the government because of my background. Customs was looking for Spanish speakers. I grew up in Miami. I'm from South Florida. And my grandparents are Spanish, Cuban, came in there. And because of Castro, they came to this great country, which gave a lot of opportunity. You can really do a lot of things and escape the horrors of communism out there in Cuba. And I became very good. I applied for customs and I got hired, and the rest was history.
Okay, so there's a little bit to unpack there. Actually, a lot to unpack. So, I kind of take I kind of take the Italian organized crime pretty much powerful up until like the late 80s, and nothing to do with John Gotti. That was a kind of serendipitous and more media. But the real killer, well, I think there was two killers. The first was a pizza connection, which took hundreds of millions of dollars and wrecked an important pipeline, heavy pipeline here to the U.S. And then number two was the commission case. You basically ripped out the leadership of Cosa Nostra, the old guard. And the truth of the matter is, he went into some underbosses, some other stuff, and the people that were brought in weren't like people that were groomed or they got selected or there was an easy transition. I think they took out kind of like the all-star team and put in, frankly, a bunch of scrubs in a way, and couldn't hold a candle to the previous. So I think that was going on, and that was obviously on the decline, right? Yeah. But in terms of organization, power, and so forth, right? So they weren't really in a position to talk to the Colombian and say, hey, you know what? Sell us a whole bunch of coke. We got this. They had their own problems. So first, let's start off with the rise of the Colombian cartels in the U.S., whether I actually interviewed Pablo Escobar's wife. So whether it be Escobar or Cali, walk us through the rise of Colombian cartels in Miami in the U.S., and then their fall. And then I want to kind of migrate over to the Mexicans.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they became very powerful starting from the 70s, 80s, and up to the 90s, and they would use Florida, right, as a means to get their drugs in from Colombia. They would also use, and especially I talked about my personal experience with customs. What I personally said and how they used it was so many different ways they would smuggle the drugs in from Colombia. Right. Yeah. They had so many different ways. Obviously, remember the submarines. Yeah, that's the famous thing. Everybody remember how they had the submarines, the airplanes, corruption. And I hate to say firsthand, I'll tell you a story here, which corruption that was MIA, not just with the ramp workers. Everybody thinks, the dirty ramp workers or the longshoremen. Yes, there was a lot of that at the seaport, right? Yeah. They had them bribed, or these huge shipments of 3,000-4,000 pounds of cocaine will come in the tile, right? And each one had a kilo inside, and that was going to get ripped off. That's bribery. So they had a huge network because of the billions. Not like, they said the Colombian cartel, they said the Gambino crime family back at the heyday was maybe making $500 million a year, $500 million a year.
Yeah, about $500 million estimated, yeah.
These guys are making billions a year. Billions. These guys are really raking it in, making big money. Thomas, you there?
Yeah, okay. You were idling a little bit, but we heard you just visually. No, so again, to give context, $500 million versus billions, and number two, brought back to a country where you could multiply that by 2 because of the buying power. So the question I have actually is, I heard there's only 3% of seizures on asset on average. Does that sound about right, or give us kind of the stats or your experience?
No, for sure. We're lucky to get that amount because it's over, especially MIA, Miami International Airport, the seaport. Yeah. It is the gateway for Latin America, right? It is just all the cargo that was coming in was enormous. Yeah. And we had a handful of people, right? What do you expect? With the contraband enforcement team, we got a few shifts. And you've got all these 747s landing filled with flowers. And Colombians were master bringing lots of flowers. It wasn't uncommon. This is how creative they got. They would put cocaine in the stems of the flowers.
Wow.
You know how hard it is to find that? Unless you got intelligence, even with a good dog, you're not going to make it. This is back in my time, the 90s. I'm talking about what I was seeing. Yeah. That's just one way. Oh, yeah. And that was the quickest way. Instead of wasting your time with the slow boat, right? Well, it may take 7 days to get there to the seaport. Man, you can get that stuff there in 6 hours, 5 hours in an airplane. You just load it up in there and bring it in. The one I felt the saddest, because I did also working on passenger processing, the set team rovers, is the human element, where they would use these mules, which is sad, to swallow a lot of pellets, right? And they would have in their gut anywhere between like 3, 4, 5 pounds of cocaine or heroin inside them. They stuff them in a plane, and then you got to go. And then they would have sometimes planes full where half the flight from, let's say, Cali, Colombia, were full of these mules coming in. So the Colombians got really creative getting the dope in and how to stuff there. Of course, Escobar will go down, right? The Cali cartel will go down.
Yeah.
And things will transition completely different for this country, like the world has never seen, with the Sinaloa cartel. And now, of course, the rise, which I wrote a book, The Rise of a Narco Empire.
Hold on, I want to get there. Because I want to chronologically get that. So we can close out the Cuban, the Colombian route in a second, and then we go over to Mexico, if that's okay. I have a question though. What was kind of the culture and the feeling from your management, right? You're a frontline customs person. Yes. Were they like, I want you to look at everything, and then you like rip up like a lot of stuff, and like there was nothing there, or was it the culture of, commerce? You know what? Stuff's getting through, but we can't rip up every, tile shipment. We can't rip up every banana shipment from Ecuador. Like, what was the tenor and culture of your team, and what was directed to you when you would inspect, when things would come by?
Yeah, it's a combination of both, because you would get the pressure from the private sector, right?
Yeah.
Because time is important. So customs gets that pressure because there's a lot of things coming in. And you know what the key was? Good intelligence. Correct. You had to have good intelligence. You had to work smarter, not harder, because it's overwhelming. You can just go spin your wheels and you wouldn't get the big seizures, but you need to work with the agents. You need to work with downrange, with intelligence coming out there, what's coming in, what flights, because if not, you would just spin your wheels and you wouldn't find the big loads. And at that time in the 90s, they were pumping it right through the airport because of many reasons. The briberies, schemes they had, they paid out with the cargo workers, the longshoremen, and even within ranks of customs. I'll tell you a story here, shocking corruption. Miami Herald had an article back in the mid-90s, and I was before customs, I was going to go to law school, right? And all of a sudden, I find myself in the front line on the war on drugs, working there, and it's really eye-opening when your chief gets arrested by the agents, and in your investigation, where he's escorting the loads with Hallandale Beach Police Department and Hollywood Police Department at a private airport, clearing it himself, where 300 or 400 pounds just came in, and they're clearing the load to take it back to a different warehouse. That's shocking right there.
Wow.
Yeah, so, that opens your eyes to corruption big time.
Now, obviously, you get the book, ATF Undercover. We'll put your author page. You can check out your other books.
Thank you.
But for today, but kind of wrap up the East Coast side, how essentially did they shut down that corridor? I know it's a loaded question. We could probably do 10 shows on it. But give us kind of a short answer before we migrate over to Mexico. How did they shut down that corridor?
They just started taking down the hierarchy of the cartels, right? With Escobar, the other side, and the Colombians were doing things different than the Mexicans. Because Mexico is closer to the U.S.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense, the transition. Say, why are we going to risk it? You have to deal with, of course, the Coast Guard. You have to deal with customs. You have to deal with a lot of factors when you deal with airports and seaports, right? Clearance and everything else. Where once they collapse, once they were brought down, once the war on drugs were taken to a different level, then they collapsed and they had their own, and the government also had issues. But then the Mexican cartels bring a whole different problems that we are not prepared for. We're not dealing with, and they're the issues we have right here. And I always say, we stop one thing, it opens up a gamut of other things that's going on. And back to your other questions before about the Italians, the Cosa Nostra, what happened to them? Well, I think the commission trial was a big factor. But when you get those big racketeering cases, and everybody's cooperating, and La Muerta goes out the window, and nobody even honors that anymore, everybody flips on everybody. and
What,
it just collapsed.
what about also, and that's a topic that we could probably discuss on another episode,
Sure.
is Cosa Nostra never really sunk its teeth into Miami, just by hook or crook,
No.
just open city. Traficantes really weren't there. They obviously couldn't outgun any
Tampa, yeah,
cartel,
yeah.
and even the Cuban mob for that matter. But I think like if they did, like for example, if the hot port was New York and the ILA and the not knocking the ILA as an organization, so I want to say that, but the union groups and the people that worked at the port, were a lot of them were mob controlled at the time. I would think the mob would be like, oh, this coke is coming in. You want it? We're going to tax you, or we're taking some bricks for ourselves. But Miami, they weren't really able to do that because they didn't have the penetration. So I think also strategically the mob messed up is by not realizing the potential, for Miami. Okay, so the Eastern Seaboard gets shut down. Give us kind of the rise of the Mexicans, and then the Colombians' role, because really quick, because from the supply chain perspective, typically the manufacturer makes money, then you have somebody distributor and import, and then the retailer. The real money is made actually, typically from the manufacturer, because they make it for nothing and sell it. Distribution makes a few bucks, and then retail makes money because they step on it and flip it, that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, the Mexicans became the distributors, and they were the one making money. So I wanted to learn, like, give us the kind of initially, how did the Mexicans get in the game, and how did they ascend so quickly?
Yeah, I think once the Colombians were on the way down,
the
Mexicans started stepping up in the late '90s. It started becoming really big, and the groups became more and more violent. And once the Colombians collapsed, they still started making cocaine was still being distributed by the FARC and other groups. They're still manufacturing it, but the Mexicans then decide, okay, you manufacture it, we'll take care of complete distribution. We're not going to worry about sending it out through. So they finished Central America. They went through Mexico and through the border, and the border is wide open. Remember, we had no border wall, right? For a long time. There's no, even now it's not even finished. The border wall, and the labyrinth of tunnels under our country is enormous. So even with the wall, there's still many ways underground. And these guys are really creative because there's so much money incentive. Trust me, they come in. And unfortunately, I always say there was no demand, right? If we wouldn't consume it, not just us, but the Europeans and around the world, they'll be out of the drug business, right? So I always say the only way we can ever win the war on drugs is people have to stop using it. They have to find treatment, because the corruption. And another issue why the Mexicans are so successful, they buy everybody. Corruption is enormous. I can't even stress how corrupt Mexico is.
On the U.S. side, though, in your opinion?
U.S. we have corruption. I've seen it firsthand. You can look it up there, especially on the border. A lot of these people feel so threatened on the border, CBP officials, because the cartels can touch them, right? They send these hit teams out there and say, you want to enforce the stuff there on the border in El Paso, there's going to be problems for you. And they have ways to get in here. There's sicarios or hit teams to take care of people and family. You see that all the time. So yeah, we handle it, but the corruption is not as bad, of course, as Mexico. I mean, that's just and it's like the carrot or the stick technique. Either you take it or the stick comes in. And one of the biggest problems with the cartels is the corruption. That we, as the U.S., we're the number one manufacturer of firearms, and a lot of the guns, unfortunately, go down south. And they have strict gun laws, gun control, but it doesn't work because the cartels have everything they want and do everything they want to whoever they want. And they buy it. If you don't, if it's military officials, law enforcement officials, high-ranking members in the government, assassinations, attacks happen all the time. They are as powerful. It's almost like Mexico's like a failed state. There's no way around it. Mexico's a failed state. And it's almost like Somalia with the warlords. We have the drug lords, and every region is at war.
I hate to put you in the spot, Ignacio, but you don't give specifics. Yourself or your experience.
Yes.
Was there ever an investigation that you did that you guys were hot on, ATF or even customs, and you might have had to back off because either DEA or CIA influence?
DEA. Normally, sometimes with ATF firearms trafficking cases, you do get rivalries and you butt heads, of course. There's always that, especially within Department of Justice. But sometimes with HSI, you would have that. You guys would butt heads, and I'm
Well,
in this
I'm
target,
going
working that.
a little deeper, and I don't mean to take out the tinfoil hat, but any groups, because there's alleged that, and I have some good conversations, and they're not, a lot of these guys don't either talk about it, and then they try to attack them with tinfoil hats, but other guys that I know personally talk about it will not come on, say that certain groups might have had a protective advantage, and some of that being ergo more CIA than DEA, but in partnership with DEA, CIA, some organizations may have been somewhat protected, if that makes sense.
When you say organization, you're talking about like Sinaloa, you're talking about CJ&G?
Yeah, like so, for example, I think El Mayo is alleged never got touched, no photos of him, 8 security rings. Listen, Ignacio, if we wanted him, we could send a team in and get him in 15 minutes, right? We don't, right?
Well,
so there
how
might
about
be
El Mencho? Look at El Mencho now.
Yeah, Mencho as well. Yeah. So there's certain guys that are kind of out there that are protected. I think that there's deals, whether, that shows Snowfall, right? It talks about how the CIA brokered arms to Nicaragua in exchange for coke and crack processing and dumped them into, minority neighborhoods. So I think a lot of that stuff kind of is getting unearthed now from the past, but it doesn't mean it's not going on now. So I was just wondering if you had any brush with, hey, I'm doing this,
No, nothing like that personally. But the corruption, what I've read, what I've researched, and it is enormous, because right now, El Chapo Guzman, everybody knows El Chapo. He's right now sitting there in the Supermax, right, in Florence, Colorado. Yep. He escaped twice, maybe more than that in Mexico. I heard maybe 3 times, but he's not escaping a 4th time. He's in that little cell there, and he's staying there, and he has his family members trying to step up, but they're getting picked off, right? But now you have the big rivals in that region with the CJ&G, El Mencho Cervantes, right? He is now the most wanted drug lord in the United States and Mexico. El Chapo, his bounty was $5 million. This guy's $10 million.
Damn.
But these guys are worth billions. So $10 million, you think anybody's going to, the cost of pointing in that direction, you have to look behind your shoulder the rest of your life, right? Especially how well these guys pay everybody off. And El Mencho, for those who don't know about him, I'll give a little background on him and the rise of CJ&G, because that's where it's at right now. The battle for Guadalajara. That is the essence of what's going on now. This ain't the history of the past. This is what I talk about. It's the things that are going on right now in our world and what's happening. And he's now the big dog. There's no way around that. The Mexican government, the U.S. government says his assets are close to $50 billion. His assets. And he came from abject poverty, selling avocados in the streets of Guadalajara, abject poverty, to one of the richest drug lords in the history of the world. Just think about that. And most of these guys, El Chapo, they dropped out of school 4th, 5th grade. They're semi-illiterate. They were semi-illiterate. You know what they were good at, Tom? They learned how to kill early. These guys became killers. They all became killers, and they're not afraid to kill for their territory, for rights, and that goes respect. And among the organization, they got respect. And when they get that respect, they climb up. And when it's have to kill, they kill. So El Mencho, in the 90s, comes to the U.S. illegally with his family. He becomes a major heroin trafficker up in Northern California. He gets popped in a major case. His brother's looking at life. He gets about a few years, and he's deported. He joins, when he gets back to Jalisco, in the Jalisco state, he joins the police force. He joins the police force in there, but he's very corrupt and dirty, but he learns the system well. He learns the ins and outs of the police system well in that region. He then joins the Millennium Cartel, which at the time, or 2000s, are very tight with Sinaloa, and then doing protection work for these guys, high-ranking members and their assassins. So he pretty much brings former police officers to become assassins for the Sinaloa. They get pretty big, and they have a split from within. He takes over, and he creates a group called Los Zetas Killers, Mata Zetas.
Yeah.
Because they don't respect, and people don't know who Los Zetas are. They're the paramilitary side of the Gulf Cartel that's splintered away.
Yep.
And very, I can't explain how. You have to look at the videos. They're vicious, they're brutal, but they don't just kill rivals. They really enjoy killing, let's say, innocent people. Hey, let's today take this bus full of people, take it back to the ranch, and we're going to commit House of Horrors. and because they can, they put videos. They enjoy. They have these rooms where they dismember people, they cut heads, and these are innocent people, just workers, and they just do House of Horrors because they're sadistic and they're sick that way, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't like that, so they went to war with Zeta because that's not the way we want to do. We do it with like the mafia did, right? There's a purpose.
Yeah.
There's a business purpose, right? They don't just randomly kill. Hey, there's a couple here. Let's just kill them because it's bad for business, brings a lot of pressure, and you don't do that. But because everything's so corrupt in Mexico, they buy everybody. Well, there's no pressure because if the police come at us, oh, we're going to come to your house, which they do all the time. We'll kidnap you and your whole family. We're going to dismember your family in front of you, and then we're going to kill you. And that's how they operate there. Oh, you want to enforce the law? And then they leave signs on their dismembered bodies says, this is what happens to those who enforce the laws in this town. Is anybody going to enforce the law when they know that's going to happen? No.
Well, also from a policy perspective, and again, I agree with this because I'm human and got to humanize this, is the Italian OC in the U.S. Allegedly had a rule other than Gaspar Picasso to go after families, right? In Italy is like the cartels. They'll go after your family. The Calabrians, they'll go after, they're ruthless people. Like the Mexicans own kind of the market on ruthlessness, but not far behind is the Italians on the other side. But in the U.S., they got away from that, right? And then you saw a rise of informants, right? Because there was less maybe punitive damage, if you will, if you informed. But I'm sorry, but if I'm in the cartel or worked into the cartel, I ain't informing because they not only kill you, but everybody you know. So I think that's a deterrent in terms of informants. Tell us how the organization is set up versus Cosa Nostra. In the Cosa Nostra, you have a making ceremony, whole like to do, honor, that kind of stuff. How do the cartels operate? Their ranks? Do they have capos? Do they have soldiers? Are they inducted? What's the similarities and difference in organizations?
I lost you there, Thomas, for a little bit.
Oh, okay. Let me try this again. Hold on. You okay now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. I'm at 28. Give me a second. I gotta get these timestamps. I go live to tape normally, so now I gotta edit. Hold on.
Gotcha.
Okay. Tell us the differences between organizational setup between Cosa Nostra and the cartels. Obviously Cosa Nostra, you're made, whole induction. How the cartel set up versus Cosa Nostra?
Yeah, the cartels also a lot of time has to do with your connections with the family members, friendships, and you're coming up in that region. A lot of it has to do with region. A lot of the guys in the Jalisco or Sinaloa or from there, they work, and you have to, like anything, put your work in, right? Yeah. And you have to rise in the hierarchy. And a lot of these guys, El Chapo claims that during, I don't know if you saw the interview with Sean Penn and Kate Del Castillo after he escaped the second time underneath the tunnel with the moped and everything else. He claims, and this is telling Sean Penn, and that's if you haven't seen that interview in Rolling Stone magazine he did years ago, that he said he killed thousands himself. And that's not counting when he became and him delegating. That's him working his way up. That he says these guys just kill. It's just that's the way they are. I think it's a lot different. You talk about some of the big names. Sammy the Bull killed 13, right? That could be in a week for these guys. That could be in a week for these guys. That's nothing. I mean, these guys in that culture, life is so cheap, and there's no enforcement that it comes and goes like nothing. All right, you look the wrong way, you get killed.
Okay, now so let me ask you this though. So the government, although is not always efficient, the government always wins. U.S. government, let's call it what it is, right?
Okay.
So the government put a lot of resources around Cosa Nostra, and essentially is now a marginalized group at best in the grand scheme. Let's call it what it is, right? Why aren't they putting those same resources, if not more, towards the cartels, ATF, DEA, CIA, FBI? Why are we not like blitzing, Mexico and kind of like instead of stamping out like
because the Mexican government doesn't want it. The Mexican government doesn't want it. They're in it. They're part of the conspiracy. That Lopez Obrador is right now, and I'll tell you each one of them. The corruption level is enormous. We don't have an equal partner. So we don't have an equal partner. We can do the best we can here, but it's not just in Mexico. Central America, South America, the whole region is corrupt from top to bottom. and the organs take over because the money is enormous, and they have more than a lot of the government and locals have to offer. So they take over and they threaten. Lopez Obrador's policy is very weak on cartel leadership. He is very weak. He's a socialist, pretty much. And that's also another problem, too. The socialists and communists have now taken over the region. Colombia just elected a communist president, right? So the FARC at the end did win because they were leftists. And now at the end, they won. They have a communist here. Look at Nicolas Maduro. He's an indicted narco-terrorist dictator.
Real quick, and I know a lot of the militant organizations were left wing, right? And I don't want to get demonetized talking politics, but screw it, I will make my 37 cents. But I always thought that let's call it all organized crime. Let's lump in cartels and everything, right? I always thought organized crime would actually do better under right-wing free market, business first, free market economics, but they seem to strive better under socialism, communism, even certain levels of fascism, if you will. Well, not fascism. Fascism doesn't work for organized crime, but socialism and communism seem to be a little bit more organized crime friendly, which on the blueprint you think would be the antithesis. They'd be like, you know what? Everybody gets the same. You're making money. We're going to stop you. We'll have a stronger army. You're going to, we tell you what to do. But organized crime thrives in socialist and communist regimes. Why is that, Ignacio?
Yeah, they end up they convert these guys into capitalists. Look at Maduro. He loves it because he's controlling the masses, right? And he's got billions of dollars. He's been indicted, and he's been indicted by our country and the Trump administration. He was indicted. He should be another Noriega. Remember what happened to Manuel Noriega?
Yeah.
They brought him from Panama. The same issue. He is a major drug trafficker in conspiracies like you wouldn't imagine. Hugo Chavez was a communist. Maduro was his vice president. But these guys aren't communists. They're ultra capitalists that love it. On paper, they are, and they love the power and control. And they look the other way because they love what they have and what they want to control. So those unfortunate issues are all over Central America. A lot of corruption also. And then, of course, you have the rise, and I've written about this, of these street gangs like the MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha, violent, ruthless. As bad as we talk about the cartels, these street gangs are worse and more violent.
I want to get to that because what we're going to do is we're going to definitely have a part two. So I want to cover a little bit more today, and then we're going to go on to the part two because I knew there was a lot to discuss, which I'm excited about. And if you're open to it, we'll most likely do a part two.
For sure.
But here's my question, though. The one thing the American government is good at is if it gets its core interest affected negatively, which is capitalism, homeland security, like they're kind of like it's like the blonde hair, blue eyed first child who's a varsity athlete. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, we love you, and they care about certain things, right? Which is homeland security, their interest or the wealthy's interest. Let's call it what it is, right? So my question to you is, when does this become a security issue where we don't care about diplomacy, we don't care about our friends and neighbors over at Mexico? This is now a security issue. We're treating this as we're putting them on the terrorist list. We're going to take military action. When do we get there, and why are we not there yet?
Yeah, that's a lot of good questions there. Yeah. A lot of good questions. A lot of things that should be happening. Well, you can, I guess it's a political answer. I give you a political answer. And I wrote a book about that. Joe Biden, one and done. That's my answer. We have a weak administration there. If you saw what DHS, the answer is Mayorkas gave to Senator Cruz and others about why we're having, since their administration, over 5 million illegals have come in. Those numbers were nothing like that during the Trump administration. So now, I hate to say it, now we have two problems. Socialists down there, and I don't want to say a socialist, but a liberal here. That's a bad combination, man. We've got a bad combination here. So it's going to just get worse because they're not being serious fighting the war on drugs. They're not being serious dealing with illegals, crime. I mean, ATF can do best it can and FBI, but if the hierarchy on top doesn't want it, the street agent can only do so much. And we do the best we can. And that's a simple answer for everybody. Is when you have bad leadership, when you have hidden agendas, when you have we're going, that's the answer, and that's what you see. Unfortunately, Mexico, Lopez Obrador's policy of hugs for thugs, pretty much what they're calling it, where he doesn't want to touch cartel leadership because he's afraid of the violence. Well, I'm sorry, Mexico's on fire. The violence is as bad as ever. So, and there's a lot of innuendos that he's under to take. His top general, Cienfuegos, was arrested a few years ago in LAX for major money laundering conspiracy. And you know what he did, Thomas? He demanded his release. He demanded his release. And the question becomes, why? Why would he want that? Because who knows what he was going to say? Who knows what fingers he was going to be pointing at? Because you think a general is going to sit in jail? No, he's going to talk. But he's out. He demanded his release. Why would you do that? Why are you being so difficult? Why reason why I didn't go to Mexico, because we have our attaché's office down in Mexico. They revoked U.S. agents in diplomatic community. You think I'm going to send my family there? I
saw in your other interview that you used to operate somewhat as an agent and you had diplomatic immunity, which did not give you free reign, but you could do some appropriate policing. They took that from you guys?
They did. He doesn't like that. He doesn't want he doesn't want even U.S. This is all out there. So I'm not talking about anything that's not out there. This is all out there. He doesn't want us doing any proactive enforcement in his country. I mean, you're not doing it. What's going to happen here?
Okay, so I look at it, and again, and forgive me, anybody who watches the shows knows what this show is about. I don't want to address the morality. That's a whole nother discussion, and I don't want to minimize it in any way. But because how the show is set up, it's about kind of like following the business end of things and knowing why people do what they do, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm the Mexican government and our economies are intertwined, right?
Yes.
And also we give them an F ton of money as well. So directly and indirectly, can we say, listen, you know what? 40% import on, anything that comes in from your country until you clean some of this up. At least show you're going to do it. And then we're coming in and cleaning it up. Why not impose economic restrictions? Because no matter how much the drug lords are giving them, the biggest customer is U.S. for the drugs, obviously, but for the aid, the economy, that kind of stuff. Why not impose economic restrictions?
Yeah, they should, but they're not going to. Especially if both these guys are leftist socialists. They're not going to be doing that. You got to have the right administration to do that, right? These guys, Biden's not going to do that, and of course, this guy's not going to do it because they're happy as the way things are going. Maybe with a change in a future, both. The good thing about Mexico, they have one term, 6 years. He was almost recalled. Lopez Obrador almost was, but survived. I think less than 2 years left. So he's good thing is he's out. But I'm hoping that the Mexican people. But you don't know the corruption is so much, and they change and by elections. It is really like in Venezuela. Maduro stole the election, the last one. He shouldn't be there. He was supposed to be voted out. The same thing with Mexico there. You need people that are going to do the things right. Right now, as we speak, it used to be called NAFTA. They have a different name for it now. But you have the Canadian Prime Minister, Biden, and Lopez Obrador in Mexico City as we speak right now in a conference talking about issues like this. But what's really come out? It's all, one thing, diplomacy, and then it's reality. What's going to really come out? Nothing. Because the issues are so in depth and so many problems that it's going to stay status quo. So we're not going to finish the wall. Well, that's a problem for immigration. Illegal. They're going to still keep on problem there. You're going to have them come in there. I guess now there's an app where you can make an appointment to come in, and they just bring in more and more and more.
What?
Yeah. That's what Senator Cruz was talking about. That it was with his So there's a lot of stuff going out there. People have to look at what is going on. But if we don't get control of this, it's like a ship. It's going to sink because they're in bad shape in Latin America and all over the region. And of course, you're going to want to come in here. So you have to know who's coming into your country. You have to. Yes, we're a country of immigrants. We all came from somewhere. Absolutely. Yeah. But you have to know who's coming in. You have to have control. If you don't have control of your country, it's going to just go one place. And these are things I talk about in a lot of my books. I do political stuff. I do organized crime. I mix the two because a lot of politicians are part of the crime, right? They, especially in these regions, they are organized crime. They are integrated with it. So it's one and the same.
Okay, so
it's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, that's all to unpack. So we're not gonna gloss over, but at this point, Mexicans are on the rise. Certain organizations now
Yes.
getting into the U.S. As an ATF, a former ATF employee, you saw the rise of street gangs and street
Oh, yeah.
violence, and guns obviously are help or the cat or help. I don't say. I think the people are the catalyst, and then the guns are the the
Yeah.
weapons. In my opinion, but give us kind of like serendipitously, if you will, the street gangs saw an increase as well. Tell us about that
Yeah.
landscape and a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's just something that just keeps on flourishing. I've seen it my whole career. And they just keep on getting bigger and stronger. And it's not just on a region. Oh, I think of LA gangs. They think of gangs in prison, or you think of no, it is everywhere. I mean, because I worked with ATF. I did my own buys with them. I dealt with gangs, different levels, and it's different ethnicity and cultures. And they're also becoming a lot of hybrid. It used to be you had black gangs, Hispanic gangs, some white gang, and now all of a sudden the younger generation, they're becoming hybrid gangs, right? And they're getting together. And then they have different ethnicity groups. But the ones I've seen the most violent and grow up is like MS-13, right? Mara Salvatrucha.
Yeah.
They were started as Salvadoran immigrants back in the 70s and 80s that came in here to do protection work that evolved to this street gang level that is today. But now they're working a lot with the cartels, right? So the cartels now work with a lot of these gangs as foot soldiers to now help distribute, which is talking about the network, and get it to the different levels. And they have the guns, the violence, they know the streets, and they know what they can do. And they're absolutely ruthless and brutal. And again, in some of these gangs, they like having body counts. They have to get in the organization. You have to be a killer. And a lot of these guys, you see them, they're tatted out, their culture. They have no, their family is the gang. And the gang says you kill, you've got to kill. And if they need to kill strangers, they kill strangers, and they don't care. So you have MS-13, you have the Mexican Mafia. Mexican Mafia is very strong in the prison system, especially in California.
Yeah.
But they have a lot of foot soldiers, and a lot of foot soldiers work for them and then pay their tax to them also. So unfortunately, that continues to grow, and it's a big problem as a country, especially what I've seen that we don't have a good handle on, and
Well,
it starts the culture.
also, because I try to follow, I also cover European organized crime, mostly Italian organized crime, and Australian and Canada, which again, those areas, Italians are still very prominent in Italian lineage are still very prominent on the landscape because they adopted drugs. And what made the Zetas actually very strong was their collaboration with Indrangheta, which was a Calabrian organization, and the Calabrians would buy from the Zetas. They now, I think, buy from Colombians, even set up shop locally in Ecuador, which I'm going to do a separate show on that. But
Okay.
also what made the Mexicans very strong, because the Cali cartel, I believe, always sold to Europe and to an extent Pablo. But I think the Mexicans perfected the European market by partnering with Albanians, ethnic Albanians, Italian organized crime, even the Kinahans out of Ireland. So I think also from a business perspective, that's one of the things that the Mexicans did right by acting locally and putting it across the border, but saying we're also going to lock up those other markets. As an ATF guy, did you guys not that you didn't care about it, but was that on your radar screen? Where does that fall into the purveyance of your guys?
Firearms trafficking. I wrote a book about that, Merchants of Death.
Okay.
And we are such a source nation of weapons, right?
Yeah.
The world loves not just American made, but a lot of the guns are imported here, and they don't have access. Then it's easier for them to come from the U.S. and easy, like I said, it's easier to smuggle in. It's even easier to smuggle out.
Yeah, good point.
Because we even have less teams for outbound, right? Inbound, there's more. Outbound is even less.
You never think about that. And the money that goes back too.
Money laundering is enormous. They want their profits or proceeds, right? That's important for them. And that's part of the game, right? That's why they're in the game. Because they want to do that. And they want to have their big palaces and everything else they have. So yeah, the guns go out and they go internationally, go everywhere. In Europe, in South America, it's just obviously people remember the scandal with Operation Fast and Furious, where guns were allowed to go down to Mexico, and that was put to a stop. Anytime you can stop the guns from going there, you have to. You can't say, hey, let's see if the guns get recovered in location and we can trace them back. That was a big no-no. That was a fiasco back in 2010 and before that. with fast food. People learn from that. But again, the cartel's going to find ways to get weapons. And nowadays, they can get the parts in, and they have gunsmiths that assemble it. I mean, they're getting even what they call ghost guns, right? Untraceables, guns with no serial numbers, right? They'll bring the blank and they'll manufacture everything, and that's where they're going. So that way, we can't find out where the guns came from, because if the gun's traceable, we can find out.
I heard they actually have
Yeah.
installations where there's almost like a version of 3D printing where they'll make each of the parts in different sections, then put it together there locally, and then you have a fully functional gun, and it's a throwaway, so you're good to go.
Yeah, no, untraceables, absolute untraceable. That's what they want. The
insane.
parts also, they might just do the low receiver that way, right, and put it together. So they're getting more conscious, and it's hard. It's a risk too, because obviously when you have people who are called straw purchasers who go in there because they recruit people in there, they go into the FFL, Federal Firearms Licensees, and they line the form. But any person, and this is all out there, that say buys same make and model, quite a few of them, right? That's going to draw red flags. That's just common sense. So these guys know that, and they need their weapons because that's tool of the trade for their business, right? Because without that, they can't enforce, because there's always a rival coming up, right? An upstart that wants to knock them out. Hey, I took out so-and-so. Well, I know someone behind me wants to take me out because I took out these guys. So they need their weapons, and they like high-power weapons. It's not uncommon to see these guys with 50 cal Barretts, right? And taking down helicopters and taking down the police helicopters and tanks and going to war with the police and military. These guys go to war, and that's how you are in Mexico.
That's insane. Well, listen, we're going to have you back on. I like to cut these short around the 45, 50-minute mark, because I know the viewing drops off. Not an indictment on you, just people have their drive time or have their time to listen. So what I do is I do it around 50 minutes and then have you back. And because a lot more, every answer that you have, I have like 3 more questions. So we'll have you back on. But in the meantime, Ignacio, how can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to Amazon. I'm exclusively on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. You can type in my name, Ignacio Esteban. You see it right there. You can also follow me on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And if you like Audible books, I just started doing that. ATF Undercover, my autobiography, which stuff we talked about here, which I talk about. It's on Audible right now, so you can do that. And all the books I have with organized crime, with the mafia, 1%ers, Yakuza. I've talked about Mexican cartels and other factors, firearms trafficking, politics, you name it, it's all out there. I have short books, medium books, and I have long books. So depends on your time, what you're looking for. If you're looking for a long read, I got some long reads for you, medium reads. And of course, if you want to just specifically on a certain topic, I have that too. So you can just pick and choose what you like, and then you can find what you like. And I always take also suggestions. If you have any idea, hey, that'd be a cool book if you can write about, I'll be more happy to look into it and see if I can do something about that too.
Love it. For those watching, drop your comments below. Let us know what you think about Ignacio, his service, the interview, good, bad, or ugly. We always recommend criticism where need be, or give him thanks for his excellent service for our country.
Thank you.
Ignacio, thank you so much for being on the Armchair MBA.